Imagine standing in the ruins of Berlin in May 1945. The city that once stood as the proud capital of Nazi Germany is now nothing but rubble. The smell of smoke and death hangs in the air. Soviet soldiers raise their flag over the Reichstag. Just 6 years earlier, Adolf Hitler had stood at the peak of his power, his armies marching through Europe seemingly unstoppable. Now he lies dead by his own hand in a bunker beneath your feet. This is the end of World War II, the most catastrophic conflict in human history. Over 70 million people dead, entire cities erased from existence, empires fallen, new superpowers risen, the atomic age begun. The world completely and irrevocably changed. Today, we're going to tell you the complete story of World War II. Every major battle, every turning point, every decision that shaped our modern world. From the Treaty of Versailles to the mushroom clouds over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we'll cover it all. This is going to be a long journey, but I promise you, it's a story that needs to be told in full. So settle in, turn off your distractions, because for the next hour, you're going to understand how the world went to war, how 50 nations fought across 6 continents, and how from the ashes of this terrible conflict, our modern world was born. Let's begin not in 1939, but 20 years earlier. Because to understand World War II, you first need to understand how the seeds of this conflict were planted in the aftermath of World War I.
November 11th, 1918. The Great War, the war to end all wars, finally ends. For 4 years, Europe had been a slaughterhouse. 10 million soldiers dead, 20 million wounded. Entire generations of young men wiped out. The soldiers returned home believing they had fought the last great war, that such horror would never be repeated. They were tragically wrong. In June 1919, the victorious Allied powers, Britain, France, and the United States, gathered at the Palace of Versailles outside Paris to dictate peace terms to defeated Germany. The treaty they produced wasn't really a peace agreement. It was a punishment. Germany was forced to sign a clause accepting full responsibility for starting the war. They were stripped of 13% of their European territory and all their overseas colonies. Their military was reduced to barely more than a police force, 100,000 soldiers, no tanks, no military aircraft, no submarines, no battleships. But the most devastating clause was Article 231, the War Guilt Clause, and the reparations that came with it. Germany was ordered to pay $33 billion in reparations to the Allies. In today's money, that's roughly $500 billion. The payments were designed to cripple Germany for generations. The German delegation at Versailles was horrified. They had no choice but to sign, but they signed under protest. One German official, seeing the final treaty, said prophetically, "This is not peace. This is an armistice for 20 years." He was off by just 65 days. Now imagine you're a German citizen in the 1920s. Your country has been humiliated, you've lost family members in the war, and now your economy is collapsing. By 1923, Germany experienced hyperinflation so severe that it became legendary. A loaf of bread that cost 250 marks in January 1923 cost 200 billion marks by November. People carried money in wheelbarrows. Children built towers with stacks of worthless currency. Life savings evaporated overnight. The middle class was wiped out. This was the crucible that forged Adolf Hitler, a failed Austrian artist who had served as a corporal in the German army during World War I. Hitler had found his calling in politics. He joined a small extremist party that became the Nazi Party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. His message was simple and powerful. Germany hadn't really lost the war. They'd been betrayed, stabbed in the back by Jews, communists, and weak politicians. The Treaty of Versailles was a criminal injustice. Germany was destined for greatness, and he would restore it. Throughout the 1920s, Hitler remained a fringe figure. He even tried to seize power by force in 1923 in the Munich beer hall putsch, and ended up in prison where he wrote his manifesto, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. But then came the Great Depression in 1929, and suddenly millions more Germans were desperate, unemployed, and angry. Hitler's message found fertile ground. In democratic elections, the Nazi Party's support grew. In 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany through legal political processes. Within months, he had dismantled German democracy and established a totalitarian dictatorship. But Germany wasn't the only nation nursing grievances and harboring ambitions. In Italy, Benito Mussolini had seized power in 1922, establishing the first fascist regime in Europe. Mussolini dreamed of rebuilding the Roman Empire, of making Italy a great power again. He used violence, intimidation, and nationalist fervor to build his regime. Meanwhile, across the world in Japan, a different kind of extremism was taking hold. Japan had modernized rapidly in the late 19th century and emerged from World War I as a major power. But Japan faced a fundamental problem. It was small, crowded, and resource-poor. Japanese militarists looked at the vast territories of China and Southeast Asia, rich in resources, and saw Japan's destiny. In September 1931, Japanese forces staged an incident in Manchuria and used it as a pretext to invade and occupy the entire region. The League of Nations, the international organization created after World War I to prevent future wars, condemned Japan's aggression. Japan's response was simple. They withdrew from the League and kept Manchuria. This was the critical lesson of the 1930s. Aggression without consequences only invites more aggression. Hitler watched and learned. In 1933, he pulled Germany out of the League of Nations. In 1935, he openly announced Germany was rearming, in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. In 1936, he ordered German troops into the Rhineland, the demilitarized zone along Germany's western border. This was a huge gamble. Germany's military was still weak. If France had resisted, Hitler would have had to withdraw in humiliation. But France did nothing. Britain did nothing. Hitler had called their bluff. Each success made Hitler bolder. In 1936, civil war broke out in Spain between the Republican government and fascist forces led by General Francisco Franco. Hitler and Mussolini sent troops and equipment to support Franco. The Soviet Union supported the Republicans. Spain became a testing ground for new weapons and tactics. The German Luftwaffe practiced terror bombing on Spanish cities. The world watched as fascism and communism fought a proxy war, and the democracies stood aside. In March 1938, Hitler sent German troops into Austria and annexed it to Germany, the Anschluss. Austria was Hitler's birthplace, and many Austrians welcomed the Union. Again, Britain and France protested, but did nothing. Then Hitler turned his attention to Czechoslovakia. The Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia along the German border, had a significant German-speaking population. Hitler demanded it be given to Germany. Czechoslovakia, with a modern military and strong defenses, prepared to fight. They had alliances with France and the Soviet Union. But British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was desperate to avoid war. He believed Hitler could be appeased, that if his legitimate grievances were addressed, peace could be preserved. In September 1938, Chamberlain flew to Munich to meet with Hitler, Mussolini, and French Premier Edward Daladier. Without Czechoslovakia even being present, they agreed to hand the Sudetenland to Germany. Chamberlain returned to Britain waving a piece of paper signed by Hitler. He told a cheering crowd, "My good friends, for the second time in our history, a British Prime Minister has returned from Germany bringing peace with honor." The crowd erupted in celebration. But Winston Churchill, then a member of Parliament and long a critic of appeasement, rose in the House of Commons and said, "You were given the choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor, and you will have war." Churchill was right. 6 months later, in March 1939, Hitler seized the rest of Czechoslovakia. The policy of appeasement lay in ruins. Chamberlain and the French finally realized that Hitler couldn't be trusted, that his ambitions were unlimited. When Hitler began making demands on Poland, particularly for the city of Danzig and the Polish corridor that separated East Prussia from the rest of Germany, Britain and France drew a line. They guaranteed Polish independence. If Germany attacked Poland, they would declare war. Hitler didn't believe them. He'd gotten away with everything so far. Why would this be different? But Hitler had one concern: the Soviet Union. Stalin's communist regime was theoretically Germany's ideological enemy. Hitler needed to make sure the Soviets wouldn't interfere with his plans for Poland. So in August 1939, the world was shocked when Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, named after the foreign ministers who signed it. Publicly, it was simply an agreement not to attack each other. But there was a secret protocol, and it carved up Europe between the two dictatorships like gangsters splitting territory. Everything was now in place. On September 1st, 1939, at 4:45 in the morning, the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on Polish military installations at Westerplatte. Simultaneously, over 1.5 million German soldiers poured across the Polish border from the west, north, and south. World War II had begun.
The German invasion of Poland introduced the world to a new form of warfare that would come to define the early years of World War II: Blitzkrieg, lightning war. Traditional warfare had meant grinding advances, prepared positions, artillery barrages, and slow, methodical progress. Blitzkrieg was different. Fast-moving armored columns of tanks would punch through enemy lines at weak points. Behind them would pour motorized infantry. Above them, aircraft, particularly the Stuka dive bomber with its terrifying sirens, would destroy enemy strongpoints and spread panic. The idea was to move so fast that the enemy command couldn't react, to encircle and destroy entire armies before they could organize a defense. Poland never had a chance. Despite having a brave and determined military, Polish forces were using largely World War I tactics and equipment. Polish cavalry, magnificent on parade grounds, charged German tanks. It was slaughter. The Polish Air Force was largely destroyed on the ground in the first days. German columns advanced rapidly, encircling Polish armies. And then, on September 17th, came a devastating blow from the east. The Soviet Union invaded Poland from the other direction. Now Polish forces faced enemies on two fronts. Despite desperate resistance, by early October, Poland had fallen. The country was partitioned between Germany and the Soviet Union, exactly as Stalin and Hitler had secretly agreed. What followed in occupied Poland was a preview of the horrors to come. The Germans began their campaign to destroy Polish culture and exterminate the Polish intelligentsia. Anyone who could lead resistance, teachers, priests, officers, politicians, was marked for death. And the persecution of Polish Jews began immediately. The Soviets were equally brutal. They deported hundreds of thousands of Poles to Siberia. In April 1940,
On Stalin's direct orders, the NKVD, the Soviet secret police, executed over 22,000 Polish military officers, police, and intellectuals in what became known as the Katyn massacre. The Soviets tried to blame the Germans for years, but eventually the truth emerged. But in Western Europe, after Britain and France declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939, something strange happened. Nothing. The French sat behind their supposedly impregnable Maginot Line, a massive system of fortifications along the German border. The Germans sat behind their West Wall fortifications. British troops were sent to France, and everyone waited. This became known as the Phony War, or the BLITZKRIEG, the Sitting War. There were some naval engagements and air battles, but no major ground combat. People began to wonder if maybe there wouldn't be a real war after all, if this might somehow be resolved diplomatically. Meanwhile, Stalin, emboldened by his easy victory in Poland, decided to expand further. In November 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland after making demands for territory that the Finns refused. Stalin expected an easy victory. Finland had a population of less than 4 million. The Soviet Union had nearly 200 million. The Red Army outnumbered Finnish forces by 3-1. But the Finns had home field advantage, and they were fighting for their survival. As winter set in, one of the coldest winters on record, Finnish soldiers on skis, dressed in white camouflage, became ghosts in the snow. They used tactics that would later be called guerrilla warfare. They'd appear out of the forest, destroy Soviet columns with machine guns and Molotov cocktails, then vanish. Entire Soviet divisions were surrounded and annihilated in the frozen forests. One Finnish sniper, Simo Hajo, nicknamed the White Death, killed over 500 Soviet soldiers during the Winter War, all with iron sights. Soviet casualties were staggering, over 300,000 dead, wounded, or captured, compared to maybe 70,000 Finnish casualties. Eventually, the Soviets' overwhelming numbers forced Finland to make peace in March 1940, ceding some territory, but Finland remained independent. The Winter War had exposed the Red Army as poorly led and poorly trained, a victim of Stalin's purges of military officers in the late 1930s. Adolf Hitler watched the Winter War closely and drew a conclusion that would have profound consequences. The Soviet military was weak and could be defeated. But for now, Hitler's attention was on the West. On April 9, 1940, Germany invaded Denmark and Norway simultaneously. Denmark fell in 6 hours, the shortest military campaign in history. Norway fought longer, aided by British and French forces, but by June, Germany had conquered Norway. Hitler now controlled the North Sea, secured iron ore supplies from Sweden, and had bases for attacks on Britain. These were just the preliminaries. On May 10, 1940, Germany launched the main event, the invasion of France and the Low Countries. The Germans attacked Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Everyone, the French, the British, the Germans themselves, expected this. World War I had gone through Belgium. The French plan was to rush into Belgium to meet the German attack, while the Maginot Line protected the German border. But German General Manstein had proposed a different plan, and Hitler had approved it. While Army Group B attacked Belgium and the Netherlands, drawing Allied forces north, the main German force, Army Group A, would strike through the Ardennes forest in southern Belgium and Luxembourg, a region of dense forest and rough terrain that the French considered impassable for large armored formations. They were catastrophically wrong. On May 13th, German tanks emerged from the Ardennes and crossed the Meuse River at Sedan, the same location where France had been defeated in 1870. They punched through weak French defenses and poured into France. Within days, German armored columns had reached the English Channel, cutting off the British Expeditionary Force and the best of the French armies in Belgium.
It was one of the most brilliant operational maneuvers in military history, and it resulted in total strategic catastrophe for the Allies. The British and French armies in Belgium were now trapped, cut off from the rest of France. They retreated toward the port of Dunkirk on the French coast. By late May, over 300,000 British and French soldiers were trapped at Dunkirk with their backs to the sea. German forces closed in from all sides. The Luftwaffe bombed them relentlessly. It looked like the end, the entire British army about to be captured or destroyed. Then, for reasons still debated by historians, Hitler ordered his tanks to halt. He wanted to preserve them for the final battle for France. Or maybe he believed Göring's Luftwaffe could finish the job. Whatever the reason, it gave Britain a chance. The British launched Operation Dynamo, the evacuation of Dunkirk. Every vessel that could float was called into service. Royal Navy destroyers and transport ships were joined by fishing boats, pleasure yachts, ferries, tugboats, anything that could cross the English Channel. The little ships became legend. For 9 days, from May 26th to June 4th, under constant German air attack, these ships made trip after trip across the Channel. They loaded soldiers from the beaches and the harbor mole and brought them back to England. When it was over, they had evacuated 338,000 soldiers, far more than anyone had thought possible. Winston Churchill, who'd replaced Chamberlain as Prime Minister on May 10th, cautioned that wars are not won by evacuations, but he also recognized that Britain had been given a lifeline. The army had escaped, though they'd left behind all their heavy equipment. Britain could fight on. On June 4th, Churchill gave one of the most famous speeches in history to the House of Commons. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." But France was still falling. The Germans wheeled south and attacked the remaining French forces. On June 14th, German troops marched into Paris. The French government had fled. On June 22nd, in a railway car in the forest of Compiègne, the same railway car where Germany had surrendered in 1918, France signed an armistice with Germany. In 6 weeks, Germany had defeated France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. France was divided into an occupied zone in the north and west, controlled by Germany, and Vichy France in the south, a puppet state led by Marshal Philippe Pétain that collaborated with the Nazis. The French army that had held Germany to a stalemate for 4 years in World War I had collapsed in weeks. Britain now stood alone. Every other European democracy had fallen or remained neutral. Hitler controlled Europe from the Arctic to the Pyrenees, from the English Channel to the Soviet border. Hitler offered Britain peace terms. Churchill rejected them. Hitler then began planning Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. But there was a problem. Britain was an island. To invade, Germany needed to control the English Channel. And to control the Channel, they needed to control the skies above it. That meant destroying the Royal Air Force. In July 1940, the Battle of Britain began, the first major military campaign fought entirely in the air. The German Luftwaffe, commanded by Hermann Göring, was confident in victory. They had more aircraft, combat experience from Spain, France, and Poland. Their plan was to destroy RAF airfields and then shoot down British fighters until the RAF was eliminated. Then, German bombers could attack British cities until Britain surrendered. The RAF had advantages, though. They were fighting over their home territory. Any pilot who survived being shot down could return to combat the same day. They had radar, a new technology that gave them early warning of German attacks. And they had superb fighters, the Spitfire and Hurricane, and pilots trained to use them. All through the summer of 1940, the skies over southern England became a battlefield. Young men in their 20s, many barely trained, climbed into their cockpits multiple times a day to face the German onslaught. The pressure was unbearable. Pilots flew exhausted, flew wounded. When they were killed, new pilots, barely out of training, took their place. By September, the RAF was on the verge of breaking. German attacks on RAF airfields were taking their toll. Fighter Command was running out of experienced pilots. Then Hitler made a critical mistake. On September 7th, the Luftwaffe shifted strategy. Instead of targeting RAF airfields, they began bombing London and other British cities, the Blitz. Hitler was retaliating for a British bombing raid on Berlin and wanted to break British civilian morale. It was a strategic blunder. The Blitz was horrific, night after night of bombing raids that killed over 40,000 British civilians and destroyed vast areas of cities. But it gave the RAF's airfields time to recover. Fighter production caught up. New pilots were trained. By September, the RAF was lost the Battle of Britain. They hadn't destroyed the RAF. German losses were unsustainable. Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. It would never be launched. Britain had won its first major victory against Nazi Germany. Churchill said of the RAF pilots, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." Britain survived, but it couldn't win alone. It needed help, and that help would eventually come from two sources, the Soviet Union and the United States. But before either entered the war, 1941 would see the conflict expand even further.
As 1941 began, the war had already spread beyond Europe. In North Africa, Italian forces based in Libya had invaded British-held Egypt in September 1940. The British, despite being outnumbered, counterattacked and threw the Italians back, advancing deep into Libya. Mussolini's dreams of empire were looking rather pathetic. Hitler, embarrassed by his allies' incompetence and worried about British forces threatening Axis positions, sent German troops to North Africa in February 1941 under the command of General Erwin Rommel. The Desert Fox would prove to be one of Germany's most capable commanders. The North African campaign became a war unlike any other theater. Vast open deserts where armies maneuvered for hundreds of miles, tank battles that swept back and forth across the same ground, supply lines stretching impossibly long distances. It was, in many ways, the most clean theater of the war. No civilians, no cities, just two armies fighting in the wasteland. But North Africa was a sideshow. Hitler's attention was focused eastward. Despite the non-aggression pact with Stalin, Hitler had always intended to invade the Soviet Union. In his worldview, it was inevitable. Lebensraum, living space, for the German people would come from conquering the East. The Slavic peoples would be enslaved or exterminated. The Soviet Union's resources would fuel the German war machine, and Bolshevism, which Hitler saw as a Jewish conspiracy, would be destroyed. Hitler set the invasion for May 1941, but had to delay it. In April, his ally Mussolini had invaded Greece from Italian-occupied Albania and gotten into trouble. Then, Yugoslavia had overthrown its pro-German government. Hitler had to intervene, invading both Yugoslavia and Greece. Both countries fell within weeks, but the campaign delayed the invasion of the Soviet Union by crucial weeks. On June 22, 1941, at 3:15 in the morning, Operation Barbarossa began. It was the largest invasion in human history. Over 3 million German soldiers, plus hundreds of thousands of troops from Finland, Romania, Italy, Hungary, and other Axis allies, crashed across the Soviet border in a front that stretched nearly 2,000 miles from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The invasion was organized into 3 massive army groups. Army Group North would drive toward Leningrad, Russia's second city and a major industrial center. Army Group Center would push toward Moscow, the capital. Army Group South would advance into Ukraine, the Soviet Union's breadbasket and industrial heartland. Initial German success was staggering. Soviet forces, despite being warned repeatedly of the coming attack, were caught completely off guard. Stalin had ignored warnings from his own intelligence services, from the British, from Soviet agents in Japan and Germany. He believed Hitler wouldn't attack until Britain was defeated. He was wrong. Soviet armies were encircled and destroyed in massive battles. At Minsk, at Smolensk, at Kiev, German pincers closed on hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers. Prisoners were taken in such numbers that the Germans couldn't even guard them all. German armor raced forward, leaving devastation in its wake.
By all normal calculations, the Soviet Union should have collapsed, but it didn't. The Soviets fought with a desperation that shocked the Germans. Encircled armies fought to the death rather than surrender. Stalin, after recovering from his initial shock, rallied the country. Factories were dismantled and moved east of the Ural Mountains, beyond German reach. Women and teenagers worked in arms factories. The entire nation mobilized for survival. The distances involved were staggering. German units were advancing hundreds of miles beyond their supply lines. The roads, barely roads at all, turned to mud with the autumn rains. Equipment broke down, horses died by the thousands, and still the Soviets kept fighting. In September, Army Group North surrounded Leningrad but couldn't take it. Hitler decided to starve the city into submission. The siege of Leningrad would last 872 days, nearly 2.5 years. Over 1 million civilians would die, most from starvation. The winter of 1941-42 was particularly hellish. People ate sawdust, leather, wallpaper paste, anything. There are documented cases of cannibalism, but the city never surrendered. In October, Army Group Center launched Operation Typhoon, the assault on Moscow. They got within 15 miles of the Kremlin. Through binoculars, German officers could see the spires of Moscow. Parts of the Soviet government evacuated east, but Stalin stayed in Moscow, and his presence stabilized the defense. Then winter arrived. Not just winter, but one of the coldest winters in decades. Temperatures dropped to -40 degrees. German soldiers were still in summer uniforms because Hitler had expected victory before winter. They froze. Their vehicles wouldn't start. Machine guns jammed. Men lost fingers and toes to frostbite. And the Soviets, by contrast, were equipped for winter warfare. And on December 5, 1941, they launched a massive counteroffensive with fresh divisions brought from Siberia. Troops that had been guarding against Japan, but whom Stalin moved west when he learned from his spy in Japan that the Japanese weren't going to attack the Soviet Union. For the first time, the Wehrmacht was forced into retreat. The myth of German invincibility was broken. Operation Barbarossa had failed. Germany would never take Moscow, and now they were in a war of attrition on the Eastern Front against an enemy with vastly superior manpower and resources. But Hitler would hardly have noticed the start of the Soviet counteroffensive on December 5th, because 2 days later, on December 7th, 1941, the entire strategic picture of World War II changed in a single morning. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor.
Let's understand how we got here. Japan had been expanding aggressively in Asia since 1937, when they launched a full-scale invasion of China. The war in China was brutal and increasingly bogged down. Japanese troops committed terrible atrocities. The rape of Nanking in December 1937 saw Japanese soldiers murder hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians in what remains one of the worst atrocities of the war. But China was vast, and despite conquering huge territories, Japan couldn't win. The Chinese government, led by Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists and also fought alongside by Mao Zedong's communists, retreated inland and kept fighting. Japan's military, dominated by the army and navy factions, saw their salvation in expanding southward. French Indochina, British Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, these territories were rich in oil, rubber, tin, and other resources Japan desperately needed. With France defeated, the Netherlands occupied, and Britain fighting for survival, these colonies seemed ripe for taking. There was just one problem: the United States. America had been supporting China and had imposed increasingly harsh economic sanctions on Japan, including an oil embargo. This was an existential threat to Japan, which had almost no domestic oil production. Without oil, Japan's military machine would grind to a halt. American-Japanese negotiations throughout 1941 went nowhere. The U.S. demanded Japan withdraw from China. Japan refused. The Japanese military calculated that war with America was inevitable and that their best chance was a surprise attack to cripple American naval power in the Pacific
after which the U.S. would negotiate peace rather than fight a long war. It was one of history's greatest strategic miscalculations. The plan was brilliant in conception. A carrier task force would sail in radio silence across the North Pacific and launch a surprise air attack on the American Pacific Fleet based at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The architect of the plan, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, was one of the few Japanese leaders who understood American industrial might. He is reported to have said, "I can run wild for 6 months. After that, I have no expectation of success." His warning was ignored. Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941, 7:48 a.m. Hawaiian time. The first wave of 183 Japanese aircraft struck Pearl Harbor. Dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and fighters attacked the 8 battleships moored along Battleship Row and the dozens of other ships in the harbor. They also struck airfields around the island, destroying most American aircraft on the ground. The attack lasted less than 2 hours. When it was over, 8 battleships were damaged or sunk, including the USS Arizona, which exploded and sank with over 1,000 men trapped inside. Nearly 200 aircraft were destroyed. 2,403 Americans were dead, with 1,178 wounded. It seemed like a devastating victory for Japan, but it was actually a strategic disaster. All 3 American aircraft carriers based at Pearl Harbor were at sea and survived unscathed. The Japanese also failed to destroy the fuel storage facilities and repair yards at Pearl Harbor, and most importantly, they had united the American people in a way nothing else could have. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed a joint session of Congress. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Congress declared war on Japan with only 1 dissenting vote. 3 days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. America was now fully in the war. And America was a terrifying opponent. The U.S. had the world's largest economy, vast natural resources, oceans protecting it from invasion, and a population of over 130 million. American industry, which had been hesitantly mobilizing to support Britain, now shifted into full war production. The numbers would become staggering. By the war's end, American shipyards would build 175 aircraft carriers of various types, 350 destroyers, and 203 submarines. American factories would produce 88,000 tanks, 300,000 aircraft, 2.4 million trucks, 41 billion rounds of ammunition, 12 million rifles. The United States outproduced all other nations, including all its enemies combined. But that was in the future. In early 1942, things looked catastrophic for the Allies. Japan launched offensives throughout the Pacific and Southeast Asia that were breathtaking in scope and speed. In quick succession, Japan captured Wake Island, Guam, Hong Kong, the Philippines, British Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, Burma, and dozens of Pacific islands. The supposedly impregnable fortress of Singapore fell in just a week. 80,000 British and Commonwealth troops surrendering to a smaller Japanese force. Churchill called it the worst disaster in British military history. American and Filipino forces in the Philippines fought desperately but were forced to surrender in May 1942. The Japanese then marched 75,000 American and Filipino prisoners 65 miles in brutal conditions with almost no food or water, the Bataan Death March. 10,000 died along the way. By mid-1942, Japan controlled an empire stretching from Burma to the Solomon Islands, from the Aleutians to the Dutch East Indies. They had captured territory containing over 450 million people and vital resources. It seemed unstoppable. But Japan had made the same mistake as Germany. They had underestimated their enemy's will to fight and ability to learn. The tide was about to turn. In May 1942, American and Japanese carrier forces fought the Battle of the Coral Sea. It was the first naval battle in history where the opposing ships never came within sight of each other. All the fighting was done by aircraft. Tactically, it was roughly a draw, but strategically, it was an American victory because it stopped a Japanese advance towards Australia. Then came Midway.
the most important naval battle of the Pacific War. The Japanese plan was to lure American carriers into a trap at Midway Island and destroy them. But American codebreakers had partially cracked Japanese naval codes and knew the attack was coming. Admiral Chester Nimitz, the Pacific Fleet commander, positioned his carriers to ambush the Japanese. On June 4, 1942, the battle was joined. For most of the morning, things went badly for the Americans. Japanese fighters shot down wave after wave of American torpedo bombers. Then, in 5 minutes, everything changed. American dive bombers from the carriers Enterprise and Yorktown caught 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, with their decks full of fueled and armed aircraft being prepared for another strike. The American bombs triggered massive explosions and fires. Within minutes, 3 of Japan's premier carriers were burning wrecks. A 4th, Hiryu, was sunk later that day. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, hundreds of aircraft, and many of their most experienced pilots. The American losses were 1 carrier, the USS Yorktown. The balance of power in the Pacific had shifted. After Midway, Japan would never again take the strategic offensive. They would spend the rest of the war defending, island by island, against American advances. It was brutal warfare. The Marines who landed on these islands faced fanatical resistance. Japanese forces following the warrior code of Bushido almost never surrendered. They fought to the death. Islands like Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Peleliu, Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa became names written in blood. Each island cost thousands of American lives. But America kept coming. For every ship Japan sank, 10 more American ships appeared. For every aircraft shot down, 20 more were built. The industrial might that Admiral Yamamoto had warned about was grinding Japan into defeat. Meanwhile, in Europe and North Africa, 1942 became the year the tide turned against the Axis powers in multiple theaters simultaneously.